Hello, you're watching Everard Junction, and today is a slightly different video. I usually don't review locomotives or anything because there's a hell of a lot of people on YouTube that are quite a bit better at it than I am, and I tend to go to them for any reviews or advice. But I think this particular loco is so cool, so funny, different, interesting that I just had to do a review on it. So this is my review of the Hornby Sentinel. So here it is, and before we get started, just to clear up any confusion, yes, I have already repainted it. This is not the colour that it comes in the box. You can get it in 3 different colours. You can get it in a dark National Coal Board livery, which is a dark blue with various bits of yellow added to it in places, such as yellow axle boxes and other bits and pieces. You can get it in an SO livery, which is bright red, which was the one this was originally in, and you can also get it in a dark green colour with the tarmac logo on the side of it, so I'm assuming it was used at a tarmac plant of some point. Really wanted to get hold of these for quite some time. Took Hornby quite a while to actually bring them out, but they did eventually get them done for 2013 as promised. Although they did hit the stores on Christmas Eve, so I'm not sure if it really counts because nobody could really get hold of them. But yeah, technically it was announced and released within a year. The factory paint finish on the 3 models is not bad, but I just wanted to have one that was a bit more unique, and none of the 3 colours that it's available in really grabs me at all and doesn't really suit this this particular layout. So I painted it in a plain blue livery to depict a typical shunter owned by a small scrap merchant. At the front of the model, the detail is pretty nice. You've got some separately applied metal handrails down the side, large buffers typical for a shunter. They are not sprung. The wasp stripes are nicely printed, nicely captured. I've left those stock from the original paint job, and the grille is also nicely moulded, and behind it is a what looks like a metal etch or some sort of very thin plastic sheet that sort of shows a radiator grille. It's difficult for the camera to pick it up, but it is there behind the main grille. You've got some moulded in headlights. The Sentinels had a small light here, here, and then you've got 2 up on the top, at the top of the radiator grille. In practice, it was very rare to see Sentinels with operating lights because usually the lights broke and nobody ever bothered to fix them. They were used on private yards by not many people, and generally they were just worked to within an inch of their life, and maintenance was really a second objective. On the side of the model, it's got what I think is one of its best features, which is these incredibly thin plastic side sheets here. Now, the real things could be seen with these side sheets or without them. It purely depended on how they'd been maintained and what they were being used for. Some had them removed later on, but I believe the original ones from the factory were all shipped with the side sheets in place. Behind the side sheet is a set of handrails, so any that you do see with the missing side sheets usually have handrails in place. Hornby have moulded in the handrail to the side sheet along the top, and then it goes down the side here. And behind it there's no real detail, as you can't see it, so if you wanted to remove this side sheet you'd have to make up your own set of handrails to replace it. If we look at the top, you can see just how thin the side sheets are. They're attached by 2 plastic tabs, you can see in these 2 areas here, and they're glued into the metal chassis. They seem to be quite firm, so I haven't bothered to try and remove them, as I quite like the look the side sheets give to the model. We can see on the front that at the moment I've got this end set up as having the full front valance. There's a little plastic insert here, you can see. That comes with the model in the box, and it simply clips into the NEM coupling pocket should you wish to run the model without any couplings. I will be removing this bit and fitting it back with a KD coupler. I simply added it in just so you could see it fitted during the video. Looking at the rear, or the other front, it's difficult to tell which end is the front. I'm pretty sure the other end is the front because that's where the engine and the radiator is. So here we've got a small fake grille. Sentinel made this end look similar to the front, I think purely for aesthetic reasons. If you look at the real things, this is all just metal. There's no grills or anything behind there. Not sure what it actually contains, but I'm sure someone will be able to tell me in the comments. Down here you can see the opening for the coupling, and it fits quite nicely in there. It's a NEM coupling pocket, and you could change that tension lock out for a KD or another coupler of your choosing. Again, we've got some nice fine metal handrails here and also on the side of this bit up here. The moulded in lights are also present as well at the foot plate on both ends, and you've also got the twin headlights up at the top by the Sentinel sword. The Sentinel emblem is nicely picked out. When you get your model from the shops, there'll probably be some lining as well attached to this logo, but a lot of pictures I've seen just have the simple Sentinel emblem with the loco in a plain colour with no real decals or identification on them at all. Due to the small size of the model, the chassis is made entirely out of metal, right down here all the way up to the foot plate up here. So these cast in steps here, they're all metal. That then runs all the way along the side here. You can actually see the edge of it there. It runs between the side sheet and the lower plate. You could also pick out just in the top corner another decal that's applied, and it says powered by Rolls-Royce, and it is legible and it's nicely applied. I simply masked it up when I painted the model, so I preserved the logos. The real Sentinels were powered by a 6-cylinder Rolls-Royce engine that produced approximately 255 horsepower. Larger Sentinels with 3 axles and 8 axles had larger 8-cylinder engines, but this particular variant had the smaller 6-cylinder. You could get it in 2 versions. You could have an outside rod-driven version, which basically had a connecting rod between the 2 wheels, and the overall appearance was slightly wider. This model depicts the slightly earlier variants produced in about 1963, which were chain-driven via a hydraulic transmission. The actual model is powered by a very small motor located up under the main engine bonnet. That's then got a small worm drive which goes down into a gearbox that drives both axles. Both axles have pickup, and most of the electronics is located underneath the cab interior in this small space here. Because the model is very small, it comes with a non-standard DCC socket. Now, looking inside the model, they've clearly tried to make space for the standard 8-pin Hornby decoder, but it looks like for whatever reason that fell through and they couldn't find anywhere to put an 8-pin plug. So it's actually got a 4-pin harness, which isn't standard. Because of that, Hornby have had to produce a unique decoder to be used specially in this particular model, which just has the 4-pin harness. From many pictures I've seen, it looks like a standard Hornby decoder with a modified harness. I had a perfectly usable Hornby 8-pin decoder lying around, so I simply chopped off the 8-pin plug and wired the necessary wires up to the 2 pickups and the 2 motor terminals to power the model. There is only 4 wires inside this model. You've got 1 wire for the pickups on the right hand side, 1 wire for the pickups on the left hand side, and then motor left and motor right. So you only need to hardwire 4 of the 8 wires that comes with a standard decoder. Alternatively, you can buy the proprietary decoder and I'm sure it'll work fine. Another nice little bit of detail is the safety tread on the footplate to prevent you from slipping over. That's a nice touch, and it would have been easy to not bother doing it, but it's nice to see that it's been added in. Also down here you can see these are the boxes for the sanders, the sand boxes, and they're reasonably nicely picked out. It's just moulded on. On the top of the model you can see we've got some more detail. There's 2 rings here, not sure what they are, maybe ventilation or something. There's various bits of moulded on detail, a small exhaust for the engine, and then cast in moulding along here as well as a little thing here which I'm guessing is the filler for the radiator. Here you can see the cab interior. It's reasonably basic but features a separately applied brake wheel, and there's a rough representation of the centre console with all the gauges as well as a couple of levers there. The interior is quite shallow due to the small nature of the model and the fact that quite a lot of the gearbox and electrical items are hidden underneath. The decoder itself is put on its side and occupies the small space back here, but most of the wiring for it has to be shoved underneath the cab interior, and it can be quite a tight fit. The model has an incredibly short wheelbase and is quite sensitive to dirty track and insill frog points. Particularly when you first get it, it'll probably be quite a rough runner. This run ran particularly poorly. didn't improve until it had finished doing its running in process. I usually run models in for about half an hour in each direction, but I found with the Sentinel, to leave it running for a few hours in each direction to get the wheels nicely polished up and to allow the pickups to bed in nicely. Something I also did was just splayed the pickups out so they touch the backs of the wheels with a firmer approach, and it just improves the contact of the wheels because the wheelbase is so short it is going to struggle to collect current. Something else I'm also considering is whenever the model stutters to a stop, either on a bit of dirty track or a point, simply pressing down on it allows it to continue going. So I think it needs a bit of extra weight. Despite the fact that the chassis is all made of metal, it doesn't seem to be quite heavy enough, certainly for my layout. There are some nice recesses at either end, and I'm going to be perhaps adding some weight in there and seeing if it improves the running characteristics at all. The Sentinel comes with some particularly good instructions. I've not seen instructions that good from Hornby or Bachmann for quite some time, and it gives an accurate description of how to take the body off. The two screws for the body, one is located underneath the NEM pocket, and the other one is that countersunk screw that you can see just there. These are applied with quite a lot of force, and it can be quite difficult to take them out, but if you use the right screwdriver and apply sufficient pressure, you should be able to get them out. But I will say they are over-tightened, and it is quite difficult to get the body off for the first time. Access to the running gear is obtained by removing this screw here, and this screw here. That then allows all of the brake rodding and the plastic covering the gears to be removed. You can then pop the tiny axles out and have a look at the mechanism inside. This is particularly useful if your model is suffering from bad pickup. Dead easy to check if the pickups are working properly on this model. Put it on the track and get it to a point where it's happy to go forwards or backwards, and then just lift one end of it up so there's only one axle on the track. If it then doesn't try and go, that axle isn't collecting any current. If you then lift it up at the other end and it tries to go, then it suggests you've only got one axle picking up. Here you can see the side frame detail. You can see there's some separately applied metal sandpipes. And it's also got some nicely detailed axle boxes, which I have painted yellow just to add a bit more character to this model. The leaf springs are present and they're all moulded up on top of the axle boxes. There's only two things that I think really let the model down. The first thing is that the side of the chassis, as you can see, is present all the way along the side of the model, and there's two distinct mould lines between the lower plate and the remaining of the body. Now, I'm not sure why they did it. I'm guessing it's just due to manufacturing easiness. It might have made the model too expensive to produce. There must have been a reason for it. But anyway, there's these two lines present. The real thing had a join line here between the lower valance and the rest of the machine, but it was welded together and it was sanded back in the factory, and it looked quite nice and smooth and was difficult to see. About 30 years later, as it starts to rust along the weld line, you would have noticed where the join was, but it wasn't as prominent as this. It is fixable, however. I've already seen a thread on one of the forums which shows a guy using some super glue along one of these joins and then sanding the super glue and the sides of the model. When you then paint it again, you get a nice smooth finish between this lower portion here and the metal chassis. As for the top of the body, I'm sure you could do the same, but it would mean the body was permanently attached. The other thing that lets the model down a little bit is the glazing. It is quite thick, and it's particularly noticeable when the model is factory fresh with no weathering or anything at all. I've attempted to rectify this by running some black paint around the edges of all the windows, and it has helped to some degree. Also, repainting the model has helped because it's reduced the transparency slightly of certain panels. But the glass is reasonably chunky, but you could replace that quite easily with a laser glaze kit. So aside from those two things, I think the model is pretty good. I'm very pleased with it, and I think Hornby have played quite a clever thing modelling this. As you probably know, a lot of the diesel prototypes in terms of new models have been exhausted, and there's not much for manufacturers to go on in terms of producing new models. Even a lot of the obscure prototypes have been modelled now as well, so they're scratching around really for new things to bring out. There's a lot of DMUs actually that are still waiting to be retooled, but in terms of mainline models and stuff like that in the diesel era, there isn't a lot left to cover that you can't already get from another manufacturer at a good standard. So I think it's quite clever for Hornby to go out and produce a little industrial locomotive. It's the first decent one that's been ready to run forever. I think the only one before that was that one that comes in their diesel shunter set or whatever it is, but it's that nasty little chassis with the Scalextric motor in it that does about 1 million miles an hour. I think it's designed to depict a Class 06 shunter, but it doesn't look particularly convincing or realistic. So this is quite a welcome change, and it's got bags of character, adds a lot of interest to the layout, and it's suitable for all sorts of eras. Taking the model apart and repainting it was quite easy. I particularly enjoyed repainting it, and I've given it a coat of matte varnish over the metallic blue I applied, and it just makes it look sort of used and flat and not particularly cared for. And it's also just a nice, I quite like the colour actually. I think it's quite a nice shade of blue. I will be weathering it, just a light dusting along the sides. Some of them got absolutely filthy, some of them didn't. It depended on how well they were cared for by the drivers and the owners of the company they worked for. Overall, I think the model has been quite well thought out, and I'm very impressed with it. There are a couple of flaws, but the price is particularly welcome. It only costs about £45 for this little loco. And yes, it is very small, but it is very nicely done, so I think the price is particularly good. So to get this level of detail from a price point that low, I think Hornby have done a fantastic job. Recently I've been somewhat put off by Hornby's approach to modern image. They haven't really done much in terms of their modern image locomotives. Even the reliveries they've done have taken 3-4 years to come out, and they still have problems getting HST coaches produced. But this is a nice change, and I really thank Hornby for making such a quirky little diesel. Most of the shots I've taken of this so far have been very close, and it's difficult to judge the size of the model even with the polybolt wagons in the background. So I've placed a 5p coin in the front just so you can get an idea of just how tiny and miniature this diesel actually is. It is very, very small. In fact, if I put the 08 just behind it, you know, the 08 is quite small, and it towers over the Sentinel. It is quite funny. Very, very small indeed. The only other question I think there really is to ask about this model is, what's the haulage capacity like? Well, being only 4-wheel drive and not weighing very much, the haulage capacity isn't going to be brilliant. But then again, the real thing really couldn't pull that much either. I find that the Sentinel is quite happy pulling 4 weathered OBA wagons around the layout. I mentioned that they're weathered because when I weather my wagons I don't take the wheels out, so sometimes they can run a little rough afterwards. So this is probably the equivalent to pulling 5 brand new OBAs. Because I've got the helixes on the layout, I can't really pull much more than that, although it will pull perhaps about 8 to 10 wagons on a flat surface, so that's more than enough I think, and certainly matches the prototype's performance. The running characteristics are quite smooth, quite impressed with it. It's got nice slow speed running, but you just have to bear in mind that it is very sensitive having such a short wheelbase and so few pickups. I've currently got it set running at speed 16 of 128, and you can see it goes pretty slowly. So I'm going to take the speed down. It will actually go even slower than that, but why you'd want to go slower than that I'm not exactly sure. But also here you can see clean track, good pickups, and it does run at slow speeds quite happily. If you have problems I recommend taking it apart and having a look. See how small it looks on the helix. Very tiny. It's only half the length of one of the wagons.